presentation will be number 88. 88.
Very fortunate to have Don Blackwell with us here this morning. So thankful for him. Don't want to take up too much of his time just to say how much I appreciate him. I've been on Facebook for a few years and I've used it just like for jokes and things like that. But I really appreciate Don's the way that he kind of let us travel with him on his journey from his accident. And to see the highs and the lows and all the things that he went through was a real inspiration for me. And just getting the chance to meet him and spend some time with him, indeed, still an inspiration. And so we're just thankful to have him. And Don, we just ask you to preach the word.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay back there? All right. It is so good to be here with you today. I have been looking forward to this for a while. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make this after what I've been through in the last few months, but I'm so thankful to have this opportunity. Do I have a designated time I need to stop this morning? Sometime soon. Okay. Well, that's not what you want to hear when you start your sermon. Sometime soon. 10 till, okay. All right. After I had been in the hospital, I guess maybe for 2 months, they finally allowed me to leave on the weekends, and a congregation in the Atlanta area asked me if I would come and to preach for them, and I was very glad to do it, but I was also very nervous. It was the first time that I had preached since the accident. Of course, I have severed my spinal cord, and I was worried about my voice, if my lungs would hold up. I was worried, what am I going to do? I can't get behind a pulpit. I can't get up on the stage. I'm not able to stand. I'm in a wheelchair. All these things are going through my mind. I was a nervous wreck. They were going to wheel me up on a ramp, and just before I got up to speak, it was actually kind of funny, but just before I got up to speak, the song leader got up and led the song, "Stand Up for Jesus." And I leaned over to Sherry and said, "This song is very offensive." On May the 5th of this year, I started a gospel meeting in Salem, Virginia at the West Side Church of Christ where Brother Eddie Gilpin preaches. The next day was Monday, and Eddie and his wife Jeannie invited us to come over to their house for lunch. They told us that they were going to take us to a little cafe that was nearby, and so we visited for a little while, and we walked outside, and they said, "Let's get on the four-wheelers." And we thought, what kind of cafe are we going to on four-wheelers? And so anyway, they said, "Follow us," and we followed them across their farm, and they took us out to this little place under the trees, and we sat and we ate together with them. In fact, this was a picture we took while we were out there, and we had a great lunch, and it was just beautiful. The weather was nice, and you just couldn't ask for a better day. After we got through eating, they said, "Would you like to tour our property?" And we said, "Sure, that'd be great." And so they took us out, and we stopped, and in fact, at the top of the hill, we stopped and took this picture. It was just a beautiful piece of property, and you can see the hayfield there. We were getting ready to start down that hayfield, and we had gone down that hayfield, I guess, maybe several hundred yards, and that's where I go blank. Apparently, we hit something. They say that the four-wheeler flipped approximately 4 times. Again, I don't remember any of it. They say that I had post-traumatic amnesia. They say the body oftentimes will do that to protect you from remembering things that are very difficult. But when we flipped, Sherry flew one way and I flew the other way. When I hit the ground, I broke my back and I severed my spinal cord in, I'll show you the x-ray in just a minute. When Eddie realized what had happened, he turned around and he came back to me, and I was unconscious. When he got there, he thought I was dead. Sherry said that she couldn't see me, but she could hear because we weren't that far away. And she could hear Eddie calling my name, but I wasn't responding. Sherry said as she was laying there on the ground, she was praying to God that I wasn't dead or not brain damaged. After a bit, she said, and of course I don't remember any of this, but she said, Eddie began to speak to me, and I began to respond. And I began to say, I can't feel my legs. And Sherry, at a distance, said she could hear me groaning and that my speech was slurred and I was hurting. And and I was saying, I can't breathe. Please move me. Please lift me up. But, of course, Eddie wouldn't do it because he was afraid what might happen if he were to move me. And so they brought an ambulance. The ambulance very quickly determined this was beyond their scope, and so they called a helicopter. And a helicopter came in, and they flew me to Roanoke Hospital. Again, I still have no memory. Once I got to the hospital, they determined that I had broken my back. In fact, here is a shot. This is just before the accident took place. We were at the top of the hill just getting ready to go down the hill, and Eddie took this picture. We got to the bottom. We had the accident. They flew me to the hospital. They determined that I had broken my spinal cord. You can see the shot here. You can see when I tell people it's broken in half, it literally was broken in half. I had a broken back, a broken sternum, a cracked C1 vertebrae at the base of my skull, and of course I severed my spinal cord. They fused 5 vertebrae together. I guess the next day I woke up, and it's the first thing I remember. There was a doctor standing next to me, and I asked him, I was very confused. The last thing I remember, I was riding through a hayfield. And I asked the doctor, where am I? And he said, you're in the hospital. And then it occurred to me, I can't feel my legs. And I said to him, what's the problem? I can't feel my legs. And he said, well, you've severed your spinal cord. And I said, will I ever walk again? And he rather curtly said, probably not. He said, I'm not God, but he said, probably you will not. And then I said, where's Sherry? And he said, she's in another room, but she's okay. At that point in time, I thought it was a dream. Have you ever had a dream that it's just a really bad dream, and you wake up and you think, this can't be real, and you go back to sleep, and you wake up, and it's a dream, and you're so relieved. And anyway, that's what I thought was happening. So I wake up later, and I thought it was a dream. And this went on for a day or two until I finally woke up, and I realized that it was true, and I was just absolutely devastated. After a few days, they flew me to the Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and I spent the next 2 months or so in the rehab unit, and I just got out in August of this year. Now, my time is limited this morning, but what I want to do is I want to make some observations, some applications from that particular incident that I think would benefit all of us and apply to all of our lives. I want to do 3 things. Number 1, I want to make some observations/applications. Number 2, I want to talk about some of the benefits that come from suffering, because there are some benefits. And then I want to ask the question number 3, where now? Where do I go now? Where do we go now in light of the things that we're going to discuss? Now, I want to begin, and I want to talk. In fact, here's one of the shots. This is right after the accident, and I guess this is still in Roanoke. And you can see that I was close to death. They don't fly you in a helicopter unless you're very close to death. But I want to draw, point number 1, some observations/applications from this event. The first point that I want to make relates to suffering. Brethren, when I hit the ground and I was lying there with my spinal cord broken, I was in pain. I was begging for help. Now, I can't remember it, but I do remember this. Later, when I was in the hospital, I remember being in the bed, and the pain was so intense, and I was begging the nurse for help. And she said, there's nothing I can do. And I got to the point that I was just in tears, and I begged her, please give me morphine, do something to make it stop. She eventually got the doctor, and they gave me something, and I began to regain myself, and the pain began to fade. But here's the point I want to make. I want you to imagine a person who goes to hell. A person who dies lost and goes to hell. He's going to have pain 1,000,000 times worse than what I suffered, and he will beg for relief, but he will not get any. He will have darkness, he will have fire, and it's not going to stop. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 11 says, and the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. I want you to think about the most intense pain that you can ever imagine, multiply it beyond what you could ever imagine, and that's the situation of a person who is in hell. When you experience that type of pain, what I'm telling you is you think, I don't ever want to go to a place where I cannot get relief from this. Here's the second thing that I want us to notice. I want you to appreciate with me that we don't know what tomorrow holds. James chapter 4 and verse 14 says, whereas you do not know what will happen on tomorrow, For what is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. On this particular day, I just showed you the slide. We were having a wonderful day. It was sunny. It was beautiful weather. We were enjoying eating together. We were having a fun day riding on the four-wheelers. And then all of a sudden, without warning, I suddenly nearly died. I've thought about this many times. When I hit the ground, what if, instead of being medevaced to the hospital, what if I had opened my eyes to eternity? What if I had opened my eyes to see angels, or opened my eyes in torment, depending on my situation? And brethren, as I have thought about that, it has forever been impressed upon my mind how real the reality of this is, that any moment we could be completely, unexpectedly cut off, and then it's going to be too late. And the only thing that's going to matter at that point is how I was living 1 second prior to that. How I was living at the moment that that accident occurred. You know, Luke chapter 16, you read about the rich man and Lazarus, and the rich man, he dies and he lifts up his eyes in torment. Lazarus dies, he lifts up his eyes to see angels, and each of us likewise is going to face something like that any moment that we die. And I want you to think about this, because you might pull out of this parking lot today and a car strikes you and you're going to lift up your eyes, and each of us thinks that's not going to happen. I tell you what, I've preached this sort of thing many times, but I believe it and understand it in a way completely different than I did 6 months ago. Here's the next thing that I want you to see. I want to say a word about the Lord's suffering. As I was lying there in the hospital bed, something occurred to me in relation to pain, because after I had gone through this very intense pain and it had calmed down and I was lying there and I had time to think, I thought to myself, you know, I would have done anything to make it stop. Whatever it was, you tell me, and I would have done it. And then I got to thinking about the Lord. As Jesus was hanging there on the cross and they were nailing a spike through his hand, through this bundle of nerves, and the pain was no doubt far more than what I was experiencing, he could have stopped it. He could have stopped it, but he chose not to. John chapter 10 and verse 17, Jesus said, "Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life. No man," now listen to this, "no man taketh it from me, but I lay it down." That means he could have stopped it. Ladies and gentlemen, that puts a whole new light in my mind on the sacrifice that the Lord made, because he could have stopped it, but he chose to endure it anyway. Here's a fourth observation that I want to make. I want to say something to you about God's will. Since this accident, I have repeatedly had people say to me things to this effect. Well, Don, it happened for a reason. Or it was God's will. Or, you know, it's all part of God's plan. Or something to that effect. Brethren, I do not believe that. If we are not careful, we get very dangerously close to Calvinism and suggest that everything that happens is caused by God. You know, the fact of the matter is, God has given us free will, and God allows us to suffer the consequences of our actions. I don't believe that God is out crashing people on four-wheelers. You know, sometimes maybe a drunk driver will hit maybe a child, maybe a baby, and as a result of that, that child will die. And then at the funeral, there will be some well-intentioned person who will go to that mom and daddy who are grieving, and they will say something like this, "Well, God must have wanted your baby in heaven." Friends, there is no wonder people get angry at God. If they think that that is God's will, I'm telling you, God is not out killing babies. In fact, that is a violation of God's will that takes the life of that baby. We need to be very careful, and we need to understand that not everything that happens in this life is the will of God. Here's the next thing that I want to cover, and this is some benefits of suffering. Now, this one is an interesting point, because the skeptics, the atheist, will sometimes use suffering as a proof that God does not exist. In fact, we've got a video in the back that you can pick up, a DVD, dealing with evil, pain, and suffering. I think it's something good if you've ever struggled with this question. But the skeptics and the atheists will argue that if God exists, either number one, He's not powerful enough to stop suffering, or number two, He doesn't love us enough to stop suffering. And if God is all good, then we've got a contradiction here, and therefore God cannot exist. I want to tell you, I have experienced some things relating to suffering that actually have been blessings, that have been good things. Now you might say, how could that ever be the case? I want to suggest several things to you. Number one, suffering teaches us how to pray. Brethren, I have never in my life prayed so hard than after this accident. I begged the Lord to let me walk again. I struggle with this every time I tell the story. I'm sorry. I have prayed some intense prayers in my life, but I can't ever remember begging the Lord. Thousands of people around the country, Christians, were praying for me, and I posted on Facebook the same thing, pray this prayer, ask the Lord that I can walk again. Now, a skeptic might come along and say, well, you're not walking, are you? There's proof that God doesn't exist. Apparently, your God's not there for you. But I would say God has answered the prayer. He just answered no. At least for now, the answer is no. Now, I don't know why. But you know what we have to keep in mind is this. What I see right now is one little piece of the timeline. God sees the entire timeline. I see a little piece of the puzzle. God sees the entire puzzle. And you see, when you don't understand the whole picture, it is very difficult to understand this. But I do know this, I have been blessed immensely through this process. Now, I'm not telling you it's been easy, and I'm not telling you everything that has happened is good, because it has not. But I am telling you that many, many blessings have come through this. And if you run into someone who doesn't believe in the power of prayer, then you let them talk to me, because I want to tell them a few things about this. Number two, some benefits of suffering. Friends, suffering makes me not love this world. Since this accident, I have thought many times, this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. You know, in John 14 and verse 2, Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Brother Don McWhorter wrote an article years ago, and I want you to listen to the words he said. He said, woe to the man or woman whose life on this earth is so pleasant that he forgets about heaven. And that's right. Suffering makes me not love this world. Next, suffering allows Christians to let their light shine. We all know Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. While we were in the hospital at the Shepherd Center, we received approximately 2,800 cards in the mail. That's not counting digital cards and Facebook posts and text messages and emails. 2,800 physical cards. They've kept coming in since we've been home. We've received hundreds more since we got home. Many of the cards that came in had gift cards in them. Many of them had Chick-fil-A gift cards in them. In fact, I joked while we were in the hospital, I said, we will be eating Chick-fil-A till the Lord comes again. We've got so many Chick-fil-A gift cards. But we started hanging cards all over the hospital room. In fact, we got to the point that we had virtually every space covered on the walls in the hospital room, and everybody who walked in was just in awe. Everyone who walked in, every single person would comment on this. One man who had worked in the mailroom there in the hospital for like 14 years said he'd never seen anything like it. One person who was there at the hospital said, are you somebody famous? And I said, I'm a Christian. I said, that's what brethren do. And it made an impression on every person who came. While I was in the hospital, I happened to be there the same time that Kenny Rogers, the singer Kenny Rogers, was there. And somebody made the observation, Kenny Rogers didn't even receive as many cards as you did. And I said, well, Kenny Rogers is not a Christian. The South Haven Church of Christ, where I preach now, they started a GoFundMe account to raise money to help with medical bills, because you can imagine the bills and things we've had have been astronomical. And there was a man in the community that had seen this, not a member of the church, but he was so impressed by this, he said, I got to find out about this church. He saw the money coming in, and he said, I got to find out who these people are. Since that time, I have studied with and baptized that man. Here's the next thing I want you to notice. and that is suffering helps us keep a proper perspective on physical possessions. In the months since this accident, I started thinking about all the things I was going to have to give up. Many of the things, physical possessions that I had to give up were because I just can't use them anymore. I don't have the ability to use them anymore. When I got home from the hospital, I sold my pickup truck. I had gone out last year and I had bought my dream vehicle. I bought a 2018 Tacoma limited edition, 4-wheel drive. It was just everything that I wanted in a truck. And it pained me so greatly to get rid of it because I love that truck. But you know, when that happened, it made me realize maybe I shouldn't be loving things that much. You know, isn't that the problem that the rich young ruler had? That he loved his things so much? You know, in Matthew chapter 19, the Bible tells us that the rich young ruler walked away from Jesus because he loved his stuff. And immediately after that, Jesus told his disciples, "Assuredly I say unto you, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." Matthew 19:23. And you know what? I'm rich. And you're rich. We may not think it, but compared to the people of this world, we are very rich. And brethren, I believe that many otherwise faithful Christians are going to lose their soul because of this issue. Maybe this actually benefited me because of this. Could it be that something that might have cost me my soul was changed because of this? Here's the next. Suffering brings out the best in people. While I was in the hospital, just before I'd gone in the hospital, I hired 2 firemen from Hernando, Mississippi, just south of where we live, to cut my grass. They're not members of the church. They're 2 firemen who do this on the side. When they found out what had happened to me, they have cut my grass for free ever since then, and they will not let me pay them. Right after the accident, the first Sunday that I returned, we went into Longhorn Steakhouse on Sunday afternoon to eat lunch. And when the waiter saw me, he just nearly broke into tears. He came and hugged my neck. When we got ready to pay our bill, my waitress said, "Your bill's already been paid for." And I said, "Who paid it?" And she said, "The waiter did." I had been given free haircuts. These are all things that have happened from non-Christians. Since the time of this accident, my parents were there with me every single day for 3 months. My dad is 75 years old, and I watched him lift my body and help dress me. My wife has done many unpleasant tasks. The nurse in the hospital told me that many people's spouses leave them after accidents like this. They say, "I don't want to have this life," and they leave their spouse. Can you imagine? The church at South Haven, where I preach, has been incredible. Many acts of kindness have been done all over the brotherhood, too many even to mention. Many people, while I was in the hospital, drove hundreds of miles just to be there and see me and to visit with me. You know, John 13:35 says, "By this all men will know that you're my disciples, by the love that you have for one another." Number 6, suffering humbles people. This entire experience has humbled me greatly. Brethren, before this, I was very physically strong. In fact, for about 3 months prior, I had started a workout routine. I was working out 30 to 45 minutes every day. I never missed a day, no, not one. I was in the best physical shape I had been in a long time. I was financially well off. I had control of my life. At work, I was the boss. When everything is going your way, it's kind of easy to get full of yourself. I was very self-sufficient. But an accident like this makes you realize how much you depend on God. There was a whole team of highly skilled doctors who could not do anything for my situation, and it makes you realize how much you depend on God. An accident like this humbles you. It humbled me in a way that I've never been humbled, and I think that's probably good. You know, 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 6 says, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time." Number 7, suffering makes you sympathetic to others. You know, you may think that you sympathize with somebody else, but until you have been there personally, you just have no way to know. But when you hurt that way and you know what it's like, you want to be there for others. I tell you what, when I see people who are struggling and who are handicapped, who are having back pain, I don't feel the same way as I did before. I want to be there to help them. Romans 12 and verse 15 says, "Weep with those who weep." When I see people who are in chairs, when people talk to me about the pains that they're having, I can empathize with them now. I think it's a blessing of suffering that we can learn to hurt with other people in that way. Next, I want to suggest that suffering purifies us. Now, what do I mean by that? Suffering purifies us. Ladies and gentlemen, when I realized how close I came to dying, it made me search my life for shortcomings and sin. Now, I believe that if I had died at that point, I would have gone to heaven. But I tell you what, when I realized that I was that close to being thrust into eternity, it made me go back and search, is there anything in my life that could cause me to be lost? You know, 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5 says, "Examine yourselves whether you be in the faith." That doesn't mean whether I'm in the faith, whether I'm a Christian. This is written to Christians. It means whether you're walking in the faith. Examine yourselves to see whether you're walking consistently in the faith. 1 John 1 and verse 7 says, if you're walking in the light. You know, in Psalm 119 and verse 67, David says that he went astray before he was afflicted. Now ponder that for a minute. He went astray before he was afflicted. What does that mean? When he was afflicted, it caused him to go back and do some soul searching. Verse 71, 4 verses later, David said, "It is good for me that I have been afflicted that I may learn your statutes." Ponder that for a minute. What does that mean? As he thought about the suffering that he went through, it made him stop and examine himself. That's what it did to me, and it's one of the benefits that comes from suffering. Where do I go from here? I'm paralyzed. From here down, I'm paralyzed. I'm what they call a T6 complete. Where do I go from here? Where do you go from here? Brethren, I want to suggest to us that every one of us makes a choice every day in our lives. We make a choice to be happy, or we make a choice to be miserable. When I was in the hospital, I saw people who were quadriplegics. I'm a paraplegic. A quadriplegic, many of them are the people that are blowing on a straw so that they can power their chair because they have no arm strength. Thankfully, I have an upper body that can work, and I can move a chair. My arms and my hands work. Many of them could not, and yet they were happy. How do you explain that? We make a choice every day to be happy or to be miserable, and there are many able-bodied people who walk around like they are miserable in the world. In fact, when I see people now who can walk, I think to myself, how could you ever be upset about anything when you can walk? What a great blessing that is. Where do I go from here? How can I have this happiness? I want to suggest to you several things that I learned from the Bible. Number one, the Apostle Paul said in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11, "I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." What do I get out of that? Number one, it's going to take some effort. He said, I learned it. This wasn't automatic. When Paul went through the difficulties in his life, he learned to be this way. Number two, I want to suggest to you that you don't forget that you're a Christian. One day when I was in the hospital, I was feeling overwhelmed with sorrow. I was thinking about all the things that I had lost. I was thinking about physical possessions. I was thinking about physical abilities. And on that particular day, I have an iPhone, and an iPhone does a strange thing. It will take your pictures that are in your phone, and it puts them together in a little video, and it will send it to you and say, "Do you like this video?" It'll put music with it, and I'm there in the hospital, and on this particular day, it pops up and it says, "We've got a video for you." And of course, I looked at it, and the video that popped up was a picture of my family together at Disney World. And I was standing there. I was standing there very strong and very healthy, and I had my arms wrapped around my children. And I thought to myself, I will never be able to do that again. And it brought me very low. And then I thought to myself, I'm a Christian. All of this is just temporary. This life is short. And then I'm going to go to heaven. I've got it made. And then I got to thinking about all the other people who were in the hospital who were not Christians, who were going through the same things that I have, and that is a life of paralysis, and then they'll die lost. And I thought, friends, that's miserable. That is the definition of misery. Here's the next thing. We need to realize, now I want you to hold on for this. I want you to ponder this. We need to realize that God did not put us on this earth to be happy. I want to read you this quote from Sister Jane McWhorter. She wrote a book years ago called Let This Cup Pass. She said, we are here to prepare ourselves for life after death. It doesn't really matter whether we live 50 or 100 years. Neither does it matter whether those years are carefree or if they are filled with sorrow. The only consideration of lasting importance is where we will spend eternity. Let that sink in for a minute. God did not put us here to have cushy lives. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13 says, this is Solomon talking, after he had spent his life searching for pleasure and fulfillment, he said, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That's why we're here, not to be happy in this life. Number 3, with the previous 2 points in mind, I want to be evangelistic. For all of those people in the hospital, I want them to have the same hope that I have. And who knows, maybe this accident, maybe this disability is going to open a door for me to teach people that I would not have taught. As a matter of fact, since we got home, I was not able to use my bathroom because of the accessibility. And so we hired some contractors. Some of the money that brethren have donated we used to remodel our bathroom. We had contractors come in. We have taught and baptized 4 of those contractors since then. I don't expect that I would have ever met those men or to have that opportunity if that had not had happened. And you know, looking at it now, it is so difficult. Looking back from eternity, if those 4 men are faithful and go to heaven, I'll think 30 years in a wheelchair is nothing compared to the fact that 4 souls are in heaven for eternity. After this accident, I thought to myself many times, I would trade anything, all of my earthly possessions, my house, my car, my money, without a thought, I would trade it if I could just walk again. But you know, there's one thing that I would never trade, and that is my soul. Because the Bible says in Matthew 16 and verse 26, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and yet lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Friends, I want to tell you this morning, there is nothing more important than your soul. Sometimes it takes something this tragic to make us realize it. But what I'm saying is, I hope that perhaps you can learn from some of the things that I have experienced. And maybe you can stop and do some examination and soul searching before it is too late, because you could leave here this afternoon, you could turn the corner, and a car could hit you completely unexpectedly, and you will open your eyes in eternity. And at that point, it will be too late. Maybe you're here this morning, and you need to obey the gospel and become a Christian. The Bible teaches in order to do that, you need to hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. Maybe you say, I've never heard that before in my life. Then let's open the Bible and show you book, chapter, and verse and study with you. Maybe you are here and you're a Christian, and upon examining yourself, you see, I haven't been in the faith. I haven't been walking in the light. And maybe this morning you need to make some adjustments to your life. If that is the case and it needs to be public, we would count it an honor to go to God and to pray on your behalf. This morning, if you need to repent and you need to make things right with God, you have an opportunity. We invite you to come. Together we stand and sing the invitation song.